Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, good. Very happy to announce that we have with us today the 2020 Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate and chair of YouAreThePower.net, Spike Cohen. Spike, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yes, we had a previous guest, Roger Mayhem is his nom de guerre of Clubhouse
Yes.
fame, and we asked him where his energy and passion came from, and he said it was you that inspired him. And since then, I've actually heard that from a few other people on, in libertarian land as well. And I'm thinking, if someone in the liberty movement has this kind of inspiration to people, we better find out more about what's working before, at least the left starts targeting him. Um,
Well, yes. Yeah, absolutely. That means a lot to me. I'd like to think that a big part of why so many find inspiration in me doesn't have as much to do with me as what my message is. And my message is that you have way more power in you than you may even know. And there is so much that you and I, both individually and working together, can do to spread this movement further than we could possibly even imagine. And I'd like to think that so much of the support that I'm seeing and so much of the energizing that's happening is from people realizing that they themselves have way more power and way more ability than they may have thought previously.
sure. Can you give us a little of your background? I read a little about how some health issues were a real turning point for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, the reason most people have only heard about me in like the last couple of years is because that's really it wasn't until a few years ago, actually about 3 or 4 years ago, that I even really got into politics in a public way. I've always had very strong political opinions, but I wasn't really a public figure. I was in the business world. I owned multiple small businesses and was involved in a lot of startups. And my focus was on making money and I in retrospect I was actually making myself miserable chasing money and not really trying to fulfill any kind of feeling of purpose. And you kind of alluded to it. It was a major health scare that happened that actually led me to rethink everything. In After a couple of years of just feeling off, in 2014, I had what turned out to be my first confirmed MS relapse or flare up. And after 2 years of being in this kind of limbo, in 2016, I was officially diagnosed with MS. And that wasn't actually the scare or the moment of awakening. The moment of awakening came after I was diagnosed when the doctor was talking with me about my treatment options and said, the purpose of your MS treatment, the goal of your MS treatment is to try to slow down the progression of your MS so that it's not much different than the typical aging process. And that was supposed to make me feel better. That hit me and my entire worldview like a ton of bricks. It wasn't anything I didn't already know, but hearing it in such stark terms that aging could, or that this incurable neurodegenerative progressive disorder could be slowed down so that it's not much different than what you're already going through anyway. And it really made me realize that we have not just a finite amount of time existing here, but a finite amount of time of being able to truly be to our best in terms of our cognitive abilities and our physical abilities. And it put a fine point on the fact that this is a fleeting moment of existence. And what matters isn't how much money we're accumulating to a point, or how many things we bought. What matters is what we leave behind. Did it even matter that we were here? Are people better off or worse off or off at all for the fact that we're here? And so that just completely changed everything and led me down the path that I'm going through now.
That's great. I had my own kind of health scare a couple of years ago. Colonoscopy gone bad, put me in the hospital, and I
Mm.
just I feel like to some extent, people surviving a health scare can put us back in a kind of growth mode versus the safety mode.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. facing your mortality, whether it's in like sort of an acute situation like what you went through, or sort of this kind of life shifting chronic health thing that I'm going through, it ultimately amounts to the same thing. It takes you out of this trance that we put ourselves in, this sort of like, well, yeah, death's coming, but I'm not going to think about that. So I'm going to kind of just pretend I'm immortal and nothing's ever going to happen to me. And I'm just going to kind of be in this stasis trance. It's sort of this siren call of mediocrity. And we don't realize it until we're facing our own mortality right up close. And it forces, as uncomfortable as that is, and as terrible as my diagnosis was, and as terrible as this illness can be for so many, I now realize it was a huge blessing. I've now been in remission for coming up on 6 years. I'm in the best health in my life for many, many reasons. But the bottom line is that if it wasn't for that diagnosis, I would still be miserable. I would still be hating life. I'd probably have a little bit more money than I have right now, but I would not like it. The money wouldn't matter. I'd be absolutely miserable.
Yeah, like
You
that.
you equate. You said you used to pursue money as the priority as a businessman, but do you see money as equaling power? Like, because money can buy power. Is that so? So for some people who are good at making money,
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't they like pursue that avenue so that they can use that money to gain power?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, William, because I want to be clear about something. There is absolutely nothing wrong with making money. I'm still making money. It was that I had no balance. I was not seeking any kind of purpose. I had this massive feeling of a lack of fulfillment, which I just kept trying to fill with more busyness, more money, more trying to pursue money. So for me, it was more important, it was also important that I also be seeking purpose in my life. And especially once I'd reached a point where I really didn't, I had already reached a point where, unless I'm going to try to become a billionaire or buy an island or something, I was making money just to make money. It wasn't like I actually needed it. So for me, I realized in that time that it was now time for me to really focus on pursuing my purpose and my fulfillment. But yeah, I mean, there are some people that is their purpose, is to generate massive amounts of money and be able to help people with that as well. So no, there's absolutely, I am an avid capitalist and an avid believer in generating income and creating generational wealth and all of those things. But I reached a point where I wasn't doing it for that. I was doing it because I didn't have fulfillment or purpose in my life, and it didn't occur to me that I wasn't pursuing.
Sure. I want to switch gears a little bit. Can you take us through the vice presidential nomination process a little bit? From what I've read, the VPs tend to be paired with a presidential candidate. Yours was Vermin Supreme, and then you stayed in contention even after he was out.
Yes. So, yeah, a little bit of background there. When Republicans and Democrats pick their presidential pick, the presidential pick then picks their vice presidential running mate. And so the delegates and the voters don't have a direct say in that at all. And the way it works in the LP is our delegates pick our presidential candidate, and then the following day, we pick our vice presidential candidate. And sometimes we'll go based on what the presidential pick asks for. But in this case, they chose me. The original reason I ran for the vice presidential nomination and did so with Vermin is because I didn't really think I was actually going to get it. I was a relative unknown within the LP at that point. I knew some people in it and had been involved in the liberty movement in a non-public way for quite some time. But I didn't really, I wasn't as well known as some of the other people that were expected to run or that ended up running. I didn't have as much, I guess, political capital as some of the other candidates did. I just wanted to make a point about some very glaring issues I was seeing with the messaging and strategy and tactics that were being done by the Libertarian Party when it comes to how they run their presidential race. That they were focused so much on trying to present quote unquote electability, that they weren't actually making the point on what makes us different from Republicans and Democrats, and reaching out to people who are already disgusted and done with Republicans and Democrats. And apparently I did a good job of making my case, because then they actually nominated me. But initially I didn't actually expect to do it. And I paired with Vermin Supreme because I figured that was someone who could, drive a lot of attention to us, to our candidacy. And then from that attention, I could then make my point, make my case. Again, apparently it was a good strategy, because I did end up getting the nomination.
For those of us who haven't been paying that much attention lately, can you describe the state of the Libertarian Party now? And because I understand there was that big caucus, the Mises caucus
Yeah.
issue at the convention. And so what happened there, and how do you see the Libertarian Party now, and where are you going for in the future?
Sure. So, full disclosure, I'm not an uninterested party. I joined the Mises Caucus the day after it was founded back in, I want to say, August of 2017. It was sometime in 2017. So I definitely am. I am in the Mises Caucus, that faction of the party. But the long story short is that the Libertarian Party has always had two main warring factions. They've had different names over time, but it's largely been between two factions: the so-called pragmatists and the so-called radicals. And the pragmatists tend to be more focused on electability and a presentation of professionalism, and the radicals tend to be focused more on presenting the boldest and purest version of our message, and not trying to water it down for the sake of electability or anything like that. And the reality is both sides have some good points. We should be professional, and we should present candidates who seem viable, but we also need to be bold about our message, and we need to be stark and clear in being a difference between the Republicans and Democrats, or otherwise why would anyone vote for us if we're not much different? So the long story short is there has been this sort of back and forth between these two warring factions for quite some time. Right now, the radicals are kind of centered under the Mises Caucus, named after Ludwig von Mises. After quite a few years of the Prague side of that battle being in charge of the LP, there was a complete wholesale takeover of the party by the Mises Caucus at the last convention in Reno. And when I say a takeover, I mean every single member of the National Committee, except for, I believe, one, and every single member of the executive committee, from the chair down to the secretary and everything in between, are either members of the Mises Caucus or endorsed by the Mises Caucus. This is now the party that is run by the Mises Caucus.
So are you now like the party of radical capitalism? Would you?
I honestly would say that we've always been that. But now there's a faction that's in charge that is primarily concerned about getting the message out in the purest and boldest way possible, and is less concerned about vote counts or number of candidates elected. Which I would say is the one thing I kind of disagree with the caucus on. I do think, as a political party, getting people elected, even if it's at the local level, getting people elected is the number one reason for the existence of the party. But I do agree that we need to have a bold and uncompromising message, especially in the face of this increasingly dystopian nightmare scenario we're living in, where an increasing number of people do not identify with the Republicans or Democrats and are looking for a stark break from that.
Well, I want to ask about that, because do you think the libertarians missed an opportunity in 2020 with COVID restrictions and being the party of pushback on that?
Well, there's two ways to answer that. One, we were the party of pushback. I can tell you, I personally, and somewhere between a third and half of the close to 100 events that I did across the country in 35 states, as running for vice president, were illegal. There was no license or permit to be had, because they weren't giving out permits for public events, and so we just show up anyway because we have a right to assemble peacefully and to hold a political rally. and very often we're threatened with arrest, and we did it anyway. I routinely spoke in favor of and with people whose lives were being destroyed and whose businesses were being shut down and who were being threatened with having their lives and livelihoods ruined. The problem is, and this is kind of the other way to answer that. The problem is that message wasn't being received because the media just typically doesn't pay attention to us anyway. But the other problem was at the top of the ticket and in the Jorgensen campaign. Yes, Joe was against the lockdowns. Yes, she was against the mandates and all of that. But the campaign, for whatever reason, chose to have that as one of the many things that they would often talk about, including a lot of issues that people that were important issues, but that people weren't really talking about in that moment. And so, yes, I do think that that the campaign missed the mark in not making that its central focus. I did as best as I could as the VP candidate to do that, but the reality is the VP candidate is nowhere near as important as the presidential candidate. I also believe, in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the protests, which quickly turned into riots that happened immediately after that, we were in a position to tell both the people who were outraged about police brutality and qualified immunity and the war on drugs and no-knock raids, and the people who were outraged about the fact that police were standing down and letting their neighborhoods and businesses and homes be burned down and threatened with attack and assault, that both of them were angry at the same system, that they were being played against each other by the exact same system that was allowing both of them to be harmed or causing harm to both of them, and that if we unite together, we can actually put an end to what they do to us. But unfortunately, again, that was considered an issue that wasn't really wanted to be talked about as much. And so, yeah, I do think that from the top, that was missed. I did everything I could as the VP candidate, but again, the VP candidate is not going to get anywhere near the attention that the top of the ticket does.
Yeah, Joe seems like a lovely person, but when I remember very specifically the George Floyd thing, and she made a comment about just wanting to be quiet and listen for a while, and I was just like, you can't take that attitude as a presidential candidate. But I'm curious just about the campaign. You know, I've heard people from the two major parties say that after you run for president or VP, you get kind of bitten by the bug of how fun it is. I'm curious if you felt a little of that.
Fun is an interesting way to describe it. I will say this: it was the most. I guess it was fun. It was the most challenging and one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done in my life. And keep in mind, when I ran for VP, I wasn't just doing some interviews at home and maybe going to a few events. I left my home in July, came back once or twice to get infusions that I have to get every few weeks for my MS, and then was pretty much immediately gone back on the campaign trail. I visited 35 states, some of them multiple times, and then in the about midway in September and almost all of October, Joe went back to working as a professor. And so I had to take on her events as well. And so I like to tell people in October, I felt like I was running for vice president as Spike Cohen and president as Joe Jorgensen, because I was kind of pulling double duty. So very little sleep, lots of travel. I got airline miles for days. And yeah, it was incredibly challenging. I will say that I'm not sure I describe it as bitten by the bug. It certainly would be a question whether I'd want to go through that again. But yes, it was definitely an incredibly rewarding and at the same time challenging thing.
Great. I understand. Would you describe yourself as an anarcho-capitalist?
Yes, the easiest way to describe me is as an ANCAP. Yeah.
So in the objectivist world, Ayn Rand was a critic of the Libertarian Party.
Yes.
And, she accused the Libertarian Party of substituting anarchism for capitalism. But that, of course, was when she was alive, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So what would you say is the political ideology of the Libertarian Party, and is it still very much anarchic?
So the Libertarian Party, and this is a big part of the that factionalism that exists within the party, is the Libertarian Party started and continues to be an alliance between minarchists and anarchists. So we have everything from anarchists and ANCAPs like me to constitutionalists to radical Hayekian minarchists and everything in between. We have a large group of people that consider themselves Lockean classical liberals. And the thing is, we all kind of fall under the same umbrella of people who recognize the necessity of non-aggression, the inherent ideas behind property rights and non-aggression, and believing either that the truest extension of that is that government is an act of aggression and therefore should not exist, or that government may be a so-called necessary evil whose existence should only be to protect lives, rights, and property. And the reality is, with as few libertarians as there are, we can't afford it not to be allies wherever possible. So even though I am an ANCAP, I routinely and happily work with minarchists and constitutionalists and anyone in the anti-authoritarian world who understand that the problems that we are facing is because there's too much power in the hands of too few people. We need to decentralize. We need to put the power back in the hands of the individual, and we need to respect property rights, and we owe each other nothing but non-aggression.
I'm curious, have you read Ayn Rand, or when were you introduced to her ideas, or if you were, and like what's your history with the objectivist movement?
So I read The Fountainhead in high school, or I read that in high school. I have not read Atlas Shrugged. I know I understand the general idea behind what Atlas Shrugged is about. Like I know a synopsis of it. I am somewhat familiar with objectivism. I understand that it starts from a metaphysical idea of objective reality and builds out from there. I will admit I am not a scholar of it. I have basic understanding about it. I'm in that position where I could probably talk intelligently about it for a solid few minutes. But I will tell you everything that I have heard or read about objectivism, I largely or 100% agree with.
Yeah, and I think that I didn't like that Rand was so against the libertarian movement. I think, and conservatives as well. I think that some of it was kind of, making sure the movement kept its own identity. But be that as it may, I think that, part of Rand was recognizing context and realizing where we are. And I'm curious about your thoughts on just the liberty movement more broadly, and are there opportunities for even more unity?
I believe there are some incredible opportunities for unity. My understanding of largely of Ayn Rand's disagreements with the Libertarian Party were the her aversion to anarchy, and her aversion to anarchy as a part of being labeled part of the liberty or libertarian movement. And so I know that was a huge part of her objection to it. My understanding is there were also some interpersonal issues, some major disagreements she had with some figures that were major within the Libertarian Party that weighed in as well. But the reality is, we're now talking several decades later, and we're all here now, and we're fighting the same beast. And even if there are things that we disagree on, I think that we share far more in common than we do that we have that are not alike, that we disagree on. And I think that we are all part of the same liberty movement. And the analogy that I like to use is, for me to sit here and argue with an objectivist or an Ayn Rand supporter or a member of the Atlas Society about the finer points of libertarianism or minarchism versus anarchism, or whether Ayn Rand was right or Murray Rothbard was right or something like that. That would be akin to if the two of us were handcuffed in the back of a van that's speeding its way towards driving off of a cliff, and we are sitting there and arguing about what kind of restaurant we would open 10 miles the other direction if we weren't all about to die. And to me, I think let's focus.
You're not good enough to try to stop the van.
Yeah, exactly. No, you don't. Your ideas will never stop this van. I'd rather die than deal with you. Like, I mean, instead, how about we get our cuffs off, stop this van, and then we can, figure out how we want to live after that, right? So, no, I think it's important to have discussions and even disagreements and debates, and I'm a fan of all that stuff. I am very much a believer in iron sharpening iron. At the same time, I think that the vast majority of the time, not only are we going to agree from a ideological or philosophical standpoint, but also from a what has to be done, a consequential standpoint of where are we now and where do we need to go and how do we do that? I think that we have far more in common than we have apart, and I think we should focus on that.
Well, yeah, I like to focus on like what should be done, like you say, because I do agree that there is a political urgency. We need to act. We need to do something. But the question I always come up with is who's the enemy? Like I heard in your convention speech, you're talking about we need to fight the real enemy. And
Mm-hmm.
so my question is, who is the real enemy? How do we fight them? And who should we be forming coalitions with? Because in my view, I think we should be forming a coalition with the Republicans against the Democrats. Because to me, the Democrats have just gone beyond the pale. It's just there's a huge chaotic mess on the left side of the political spectrum, and they're with their woke nonsense and their political correctness and their socialism. It's just becoming intolerable, and we have to form a mega coalition on the right to get rid of the left, and then we can start squabbling over what form of government we should have.
Right. So I look at that a little bit differently. I certainly agree on two of those things. One, I think the left has, as a whole, especially the I guess mainstream progressive left, has just completely lost the script. I think that they have completely fallen for the corporatist line, hook, line, and sinker when in the wake of the 2008 crash and the bailouts and TARP and all of that, and you had Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. Tea Party was focused on being against big government, and Occupy Wall Street was focusing on being against these big businesses that were so cozy with big government. And I think they were very quickly starting to understand that they largely agreed and had the same common enemy in that. And I think that that's when you started seeing the beginning of this increasingly identity-based arguing over things that don't affect the vast majority of people, and yet people will insist on arguing about it endlessly. And so I think that that's a major problem. Where I don't agree with you is, yes, we know that the left and the Democratic Party is completely far gone. Unfortunately, we do have the benefit of knowing what happens when Republicans are in charge. We saw $7 trillion of debt in one term. We saw more new anti-gun regulations passed in one term than under the last, I think, 3 or 4 presidents before him, all the while getting the endorsement of the NRA. So not only was Donald Trump passing and pushing for not just regulations he was writing as executive orders, but also pushing for things like red flag laws in all 50 states. But he was getting cover from the so-called pro-gun rights lobby, or at least the mainstream of it, and therefore was blunting any ability within the pro-gun rights movement to stop him. We saw at a time, you talk about missing the script on the lockdowns. It was Donald Trump's HHS and his employee, Anthony Fauci, who he complained about on Twitter, but did nothing to actually stop, who was guiding the states through these lockdowns by dusting off George Bush's 2005 bird flu lockdown plan and then using it for COVID. Even though Donald Trump, talked about the China virus and the Wuhan flu, there was no internal push from the executive level to actually look for the origins of COVID, which if we had started back in 2020, would be a lot further along, knowing the kind of stuff we're just now finding out about, the lab leak and so forth. And so, no, I think that as long as the right, for lack of a better word, is embodied under the Republican Party, which is really just the other head of the two-headed monster, or as another way to put it, just the so-called good cop and the good cop, bad cop routine. I don't think that we can say, let's unite with the Republicans to stop the Democrats, because that's not the game. The game is the Republicans and Democrats unite to stop everyone else and to divide us against each other. But what I will say is this. I will work with anyone, just about anyone, on an issue that we agree on and push forward on that where we have much better potential for victory working together than working separately or fighting against each other. And if in doing so, I can show them that liberty works and statism doesn't, then all the better. But worst case scenario, if I don't change their mind on anything else, if I was only able to work with a Democrat on decriminalizing psilocybin or ending qualified immunity, or I'm only able to work with a Republican on fighting against gun control or eminent domain or something like that, but they continue to be against me on all of the other things that we disagree on, then the worst case scenario is I just leveraged my political opponent to help me accomplish libertarian goals. So I'm a big fan of working with anyone who agrees with me on an issue to do good. And then on the things that we disagree on, then that's where we part.
Maybe there's a macro and a micro level to this. Like you seem to be at the micro level. You're involved in a libertarian party, and you're a candidate, and you're involved in political happenings, and so you're kind of, you have to deal with people on the individual level. But for someone like me who's not really, politically active, I just vote. For me, it's like at a macro level. I see this cultural battle going on, and I see if I stick with the Republicans, then I have a better chance of just them crushing the Democrats.
But
and
there
maybe
might be
even
a time when the libertarians start to gain enough momentum that they're the ones going up against the Democrats.
yeah, I'd like
And
to
that's
see that.
well, I'd like to see that too. I would be happy for the libertarians to become the second party in some of these cases, and then eventually the first party. And I understand what you're saying. Yes, we can work together and with the Republicans and crush the Democrats. The problem is now we got to deal with Republicans, and we've now helped empower them to have all of the power that the Democrats just had, and now they're using it. Again, we've seen this enough times to see the pattern of what happens. Yay, George Bush got elected. Finally, we took it from that evil Bill Clinton, and George Bush comes in. And then after 9/11, shortly in the 2002 midterms, now the Republicans are in charge of both houses. Finally, we've got the Democrats to heal, and we can get the debt down, and we can get the cost of government down, and we can get government within its constitutional limitations, and we can respect people's civil liberties and their right to keep and bear arms. And the opposite happened. We saw a massive expansion of not just the size and scope and power and growth of government, but we saw a new growth of government where it spies on us. And now, with it, thanks to new technologies, now it spies on everything we do because we walk around with phones with cameras and GPS locators on them. So now we have a government that checks on us at all times, has a database and a supercomputer that is so powerful that they had to divert a river to cool the supercomputers that they use to spy on every American, with or without any kind of probable cause. All of that, it was passed in a bipartisan way, but it was pushed by Republicans under the standard Republican mantra of we have to protect ourselves from the bad guys. And we see that now with how they're pushing on these immigration restrictions and so-called powers at the border that don't limit themselves to the border. Those same powers can be used all over the place. And it's Republicans that are pushing for that. It's Republicans who are pushing in many places for red flag laws, which is insane because we see how those are used. If you put up a conservative or libertarian opinion on the internet, someone has you swatted, and they come and take your guns without due process or even knocking on your door. And yet there are many Republicans pushing for that. There are many Republicans pushing for us to get even further involved in this war in Ukraine and to start a second one in Taiwan. So no, I will say even on a macro level, we've seen what the Republican Party offers us. It's what the Democrat Party offers us, except instead of it being wrapped in a rainbow flag, it's wrapped in an American flag.
So yeah, I hear you about the Republicans. They are a concern, and I'm by no means in agreement with everything the Republican Party has to offer.
Of course.
But let me just say that, in my view, if we can knock out the Democrats as a serious, contender, and the libertarians can step up and become the opposition to the Republicans. That would be a
Right.
much better scenario than what we have now, in my opinion, because what we have now is the Democrats and the Republicans are kind of, they're equal basically in power, and they shift, every 4 years we get a swing one way or the other, and they don't really counter each other or oppose each other. And so I think even with the Republican flaws, I think they aren't as bad as what the Democrats, have. They have bigger flaws. They have many more problems than the Republicans, in my view. That's just how I see it. I think it is a macro level, and it's hard to pick apart all the details. But
Of
if
course.
we could, if the Libertarians could become that opposition to the Republicans, that would be much better, in my view.
It would be 1,000 times better, right? You'd have one party that says they want to limit government, the other one who says, okay, do it, or else we'll get elected and we'll do it for you. I agree 100% on that. I will say, having watched Democrats and Republicans work together to fight to make sure that we're not even on the ballot as an option, I don't believe that there is with Republican voters, absolutely. But with leadership, even at the state and local level at the Republican Party, absolutely not. They need the Democrats. The Democrats need Republicans like Republicans need Democrats. They need each other to be the bad cop to their good cop to their base, so that they don't have to actually follow through with their campaign promises, and they can say, hey, listen, you still got to vote for me, or else you're going to get that guy over there. But the reality is they work together. If it's time to raise the debt ceiling, they raise the debt ceiling. If it's time to increase the debt, they increase the debt. If it's time to bail out a bank, they bail out a bank. If it's time to start a new war, they start a new war. But no, I mean, on the outset, would it be better to have, two parties that are both claiming that they want to have a smaller government? I couldn't agree with you more on that.
Along those lines, I'm a huge fan of Dave Smith, and one of the things that he did during the 2022 election in Arizona, he actually bucked the Libertarian Party and backed Blake Masters, who didn't even win, but he thought it was a close enough race, and he didn't want to play spoiler. And also, I seem to think that he's kind of a fan of Ron DeSantis, and he may be running for the party nomination himself. And I'm just curious if there's some sort of scenario where he's gonna, could end up bowing out to help DeSantis at the last minute.
I will say this. First of all, I don't want to, Dave's a friend. I don't want to speak on behalf of Dave. I will say that when it comes to the Arizona race, I suspect that some of the things that were said by the Libertarian candidate in that race pushed Dave over, or helped to push Dave over the edge to support Masters. But I don't want to claim that that's certain, and I would prefer to not speak on behalf of why Dave, what his calculation was there. It was not a calculation that I made or would have made, but I'll let him speak on that. Speaking to the question of someone running for the nomination with the goal of dropping out and endorsing one of the other candidates, I would not. If I knew that
I
the
don't think
candidate,
that's his goal. I think he might do that in a scenario where DeSantis got in there. They had a similar conversation to Blake Masters, and it was a close race.
yeah.
DeSantis may not even be the nominee.
Oh yeah, no, he might not be the nominee. He might not even run. And I don't even want to get specific to Dave and DeSantis. I just want to talk about the idea of a libertarian candidate dropping out and endorsing the other candidate. Whatever strategic or tactical value that may have, it also has the effect of making everyone, when they hear libertarian candidate for, especially if it's at the presidential level, if they hear libertarian candidate for anything at any other point, they think, oh yeah, that's the party that drops out at the end and endorses the Republican. I mean, to this day, the fact that Bill Weld, when he was the 2016 VP nominee, and he went on a couple of MSNBC and I think CNN shows, and all but endorsed Hillary Clinton and said, well, I'd like you to vote for us, but if you're not going to vote for us, then you should vote for Hillary Clinton. That alone continues to haunt the party. That I remember so many times when I would be at events and someone who didn't know much about me or about the party, and someone, just from the public would show up and they'd say something like, they'd say, what are you going to tell us why we should vote for Trump or for Biden? I'm like, no, we don't do that. But that's we still had to deal with that. It was years later, and that's so if then a candidate actually went and dropped out and supported one of the other candidates, even if there was some kind of short term strategic value, like that other the Republican candidate had made some concessions or something like that, that has the effect of labeling the party as the spoiler party forever. And or at least for quite a bit of time. So I would never support that tactic or that strategy. I didn't support it when the Arizona Libertarian candidate dropped out and endorsed Masters. I haven't supported it when other Libertarian candidates have done that, and I wouldn't support it for that. And that's not specific to Dave and Ron DeSantis or
Sure.
anything else. It's just in general, I would not support that. I don't think that is not the role. If I'm running for president, or Dave or someone else is running for president, the pitch that I would make is, okay, you want my votes? Be as or more libertarian than me, and you'll get my votes because people think you're more likely to win anyway. But I'm staying in the race and I'm still running to win. I'm not going to drop out. A, because of what it would do for the party, and B, because frankly, I'm a better assurance that you're actually going to say and do things if I stay in the race than if I drop out of it.
Well, if Masters had won, he might have felt obliged to enact some sort of libertarian legislation. I like it as a friend of unity, but I think it's a fair point of disagreement. I want to switch over some to tell us about your whole "You Are the Power" program that I've seen inspire others.
Sure, absolutely. So "You Are the Power" came from thoughts I had had even before the campaign, some experiences I'd had during the campaign and after the campaign, of realizing that our problem, and I say our, I'm including all of us in the liberty movement, is we're very small and most people don't understand what we're even about. They either have never heard of us or they've heard a really bad take about us from one of our opponents, or even sometimes from one of us, because some of us probably shouldn't be explaining it. But anyway, they have not heard they don't have a good take on what it is. So I very often someone will say, I'll hear someone go, "Oh, libertarian, you mean like liberal?" Like they don't even know what it means. And then I'll hear other people go, "Oh yeah, libertarians, you're just those selfish people who don't care about anyone else, and you don't care about people being able to afford things, and you just want the rich oligarchs to take over." Like they have no idea what we're about. They have no clue whatsoever. Or very often, and this is again part of the issue I have with some of the strategies of dropping out stuff. A lot of times they'll go, "Oh yeah, you're like those Republicans who like weed or whatever," and so they don't understand who or what we're about. And they certainly don't understand that we have the solutions to the problems that we're facing. And I realized that as long as we continue to focus on explaining instead of doing, we're always going to be here. Libertarians are disproportionately represented by people who are attracted to ideas and systems. We look at charts and get excited. We're not like most people. And the problem is when we try to talk about our ideas to people, we very often fail because A, we're not presenting it in a way that would connect with them. And B, they don't learn from being told stuff. They learn from having things demonstrated to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just people are different. That's how they are. And so since most people are like that, we need to adjust. And at the same time, there are people suffering right now under the consequences of statism and authoritarianism while we argue with each other over the best way to present our ideas on Twitter. And so what I realized with You Are the Power is we needed to create something that seeks to find people who need help them now, get people organized around helping them now. And helping them is a variety of different things, everything from charitable efforts to reform efforts to holding bad actors in government accountable and everything in between. Helping people now getting people organized around those efforts, exposing people to the underlying principles and ideas behind why we do what we do, and creating a network effect of people who are excited, organized, and who are increasingly aligned with our ideas, or at least aligned with the consequences of our ideas, and growing the liberty movement by helping people and creating an actual army of people who are doing things. That's where the power is. And we officially launched last May. We haven't even existed for a year. We already have 2,000 members across the country. We've already been engaged in dozens of different causes and efforts, and we're growing by the day. And I'm very excited to see where this is going.
That's great.
You know, one of the things you said at your convention speech was that we need to cyber bully the government on social media
Yes.
24/7 until they
Yes.
delete their accounts. I love
Until they
that.
delete their accounts. Yes. Yes.
And
That's a big part of what we do. We actually have a cyber bully the government shirt on the You Are the Power shop.
great. I mean, is that like one of the main ways to take the power back? Is just you got to get in their faces and shame them out of existence? Is that what we need to do?
So that's not the only thing we need to do, but it is a good thing to do. And we have found that it is very useful in driving attention to something that people didn't know about by creating this swarm of people on the internet who are, swarming on these local officials or, local departments or whatever, and exposing the bad things that they're doing. It also creates within that community an awareness of what's happening, and it creates the narrative that a whole bunch of people think that this is wrong and that this thing is the solution. And unfortunately, a lot of people just go with what they think is popular. So if they're seeing thousands of people all saying, hey, this is screwed up and you should be doing this instead, we get a lot of people on our side, just because that's how a lot of people fall into the herd mentality. The other effect it has is getting media attention. Local media is starved for things to talk about. I can't tell you how many local media interviews I've done, both in person and over the phone, where they literally do an entire article about the fact that we've ratioed some Facebook page for the local sheriff's department or the local city council or county council or school board or zoning board or whatever. And so it also brings attention to it. And then the final thing it does is it makes people feel brave. A lot of people, we need people not just to show up online, we need them to show up to city councils by the dozen or even by the hundred and show these people, we're not going away until you do this. And if we have to vote and replace you, then we'll do that. But in the meantime, you're not going to have any peace at your council meetings. You're not going to just sit here and calmly sip your coffee. You're going to have a bunch of people giving you a piece of their mind, and as you go through the community, you're going to have a lot of people giving you ugly looks because everyone knows that you're the person who did this bad thing, and you need to undo it, and you need to do the right thing. And but the thing is, people don't feel brave very often. They don't have experience doing that. It seems very intimidating to show up and sign up to be one of the public commenters. But if we can get 50 or 100 people to show up, now suddenly they feel a lot more brave. I watch it happen. I've shown up at some of these city council meetings, and I'll be there, at the beginning, and I'll see the first 5 or 6 people show up, or 10, 15 people show up, and they're, kind of looking around and kind of getting a feel for things. And, they're happy to see me or to see the people that they know there or whatever. And then when it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 100, 150 people, now they're not just looking around. They're brave. They're coming up with chants. They're yelling into their bullhorns. They're signing up left and right to be on there. They're loudly cheering when the people are making their points in the public comments. They're jeering at the council members when they're walking into the building. Like they now feel brave because there's many of them. It's not just a few of them doing it. So I like to say that the swarm, and I've been told I should be saying swarm instead of cyberbullying because technically we're not bullying people. But anyway, that cyberbullying or swarm effect, that is where it starts very often. And what we found is sometimes all it took was that. Sometimes these city or county council members who've never, maybe they get 4 comments on a post, now they see thousands of them and they're all angry. Very often we get them to do the right thing before we even have to show up to their meeting.
This reminds me of something I've been saying. I've been saying that the debate is over and it's time to act, because when we talk about these political issues, it seems like you don't make any progress engaging in civil discussion with people or civil debates. They have their views now, and we have our views. There's a line being drawn in the sand between the liberty folk and the government control folk, and I think that cyberbullying might have a negative connotation to a lot of people, but it can have a positive connotation, because you have like the bully pulpit. There's a purpose for things like the bully pulpit,
Mm-hmm.
or just trying really to just you know either heckle or shame someone out of the conversation, because they're not it's not a fruitful discussion anymore, and you're really in like this uncivil atmosphere, and you just are basically at war with them culturally.
Yeah, so the way I see it is, yes, there are very many times that there's nothing to be had with a civil discussion. There's also a lot of times that people, even if they agree with you, or even if you can make a point, you're not going to get them until they can actually see what you're talking about. They can see the results of what you're talking about. I've had many times I've been talking with someone about an issue, and they'll go, "Yeah, but you guys can't win." Well, you know what? That's a point. That's a good point. Any point I'm making doesn't really matter if I can't do it anyway. So if I can instead say, yeah, well, you say we can't win, but look at all these things we were able to accomplish. That's a win. We can actually show that. I will also say that, when we are dealing with these issues, very rarely does anyone show up to disagree with us. Maybe one or two people, and usually they're either, like family members of the public officials, or, it's some, corrupt local who was, hoping to be able to buy the land that's being seized with eminent domain for pennies on the dollar or something like that. But for the most part, we get the public on our side, or they show up and don't really know what to think. I think a lot of this culture war that we see is a bunch of shrill people arguing on the internet, and maybe a handful of people that are largely usually the same exact people who show up and fist fight each other in the streets. But I think largely speaking, the vast majority of people just want to stay out of it. And if they're going to get involved in something, it's going to be something that actually matters to them in their community. And so when we identify these issues, these people that are being harmed or who need help in their community, and we can create a positive and proactive thing that isn't assigned to some party or even specifically to some ideology, but is just about, this is that what's happening here is wrong, and that this needs to happen for it to be made right, then we create huge coalitions of people. Some of our events, we did a big event in one of many in Gastonia, North Carolina, around a homeless veteran who was brutalized by the police there, and the police lied about it, said he assaulted them, and fought to keep the body cam footage from being released. And lo and behold, once we successfully got it released, it showed that they were lying, and that they just bullied him for no reason. They beat him up, and they ended up killing his service dog. And anyway, we had this event. We had Republicans show up. We had Democrats show up. We had homeschool parents and their kids show up. We had church groups show up. We had members of the homeless community there in Gastonia show up. We had veterans who weren't really politically oriented showing up. We had a ton of libertarians show up, of course. It was not a culture war. It was a unification of basically every demographic in that county coming together, because we had built a consensus around the idea that this person had been harmed. No one could dispute that. And the people in charge there were doing everything they could to bury it. That was wrong, and they needed to be held accountable for it. And we didn't make an argument about left versus right, or capitalism versus socialism, or anarchism versus minarchism, or any of that. We said, this is wrong, and this is what needs to be done. And we got a huge, broad coalition of people, and they couldn't ignore it. And we got almost, so far we've continued to fight for that, but we've gotten so many things accomplished on that front, and have continued to find other people in that area who need help, and help them as well, because we aren't fighting each other. We're working with each other. I think there's far more unification that can happen than most people who probably spend, and I put myself in this group, people who spend too much time on the internet, including myself. We very often forget most of us are actually just trying to get by in life. And if we can find common threads to work together, we've built some impressive coalitions of people that you would not think would work together.
That's great. Well, just along the lines of the internet and I'm not easily offended, and I'm actually a big fan for the most part of like the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire's Twitter account. But like on President's Day, they put out pictures of the 4 presidents who were assassinated, and
Yes, yes.
just from a practical perspective, I'm just curious about they don't want to get into like that Phelps territory of like God hates gay people or
Right.
where it's just not effective.
Yes. So I do think, and I will say, I'm friends with a couple of people that are on the New Hampshire social media team, and I talk with them a lot about some of the things they put forward. Now, I will say, I do think that there is a place for bold or even controversial messaging, but it needs to be put together in a way that makes the point you want to make. And I think what happens very often, I'm glad you brought up Fred Phelps, because I do think some of them do want to be the Westboro Baptist Church branch of the Libertarian Party, and would say so themselves. Like they're not like they wouldn't take issue with that descriptor or that analogy. I think that when you put something forward that is controversial and is going to get a lot of attention, especially negative attention, that is useful if you are doing so in a way that feeds within the narrative that you're trying to push. And if instead you put it forward in a way that doesn't present your narrative, or even worse, underscores and reinforces the narrative that your opponent or that the other side is trying to push, you just helped them. An example of that I will give is the infamous John McCain tweet, where on the anniversary of John McCain's birthday, or the anniversary of John McCain's death, they put up a picture of Meghan McCain, that photo of her crying with her,
coffin,
on his next to his coffin, and just said happy holidays. And I listen, you will find no greater critic of John McCain, who I consider a war criminal who is responsible for the deaths of countless millions of people. There is no thing that could be said about John McCain that would make me flinch, which is why I didn't like that, because it made John McCain and Meghan McCain into sympathetic characters without driving home why they didn't like him, and sort of made themselves look like the bad guys who were just celebrating some guy's death. Here's a flag draped casket, and without the context that the vast majority of Americans don't have of why they were saying this, it just looked like they were these bad people who are punching down on this poor grieving daughter. And if instead, an example I had given, if instead they had put up that photo, and next to it put up a photo of a family who had been destroyed in one of the drone bombings that was pushed under one of the wars that John McCain saber rattled for decades, and said something along the lines of, 3 years ago or 4 years ago today, John McCain died surrounded in love and safety by his closest loved ones. Unfortunately, the millions of his victims didn't get to afford such a peaceful end, or something like that, and show those competing images. Yes, that's still going to create controversy. That's still going to pull people out of the woodwork saying, how dare you say that about John McCain? But the narrative is John McCain got to die safely and surrounded by love, and he murdered millions of people who died in their homes being bombed or shot or missiled or whatever else. And, that's the point we're trying to make. It's still controversial. Some people are going to get pissed off, but a lot of people who didn't know that about John McCain would get exposed to that when other people would share it and go, oh my God, can you believe this? And they look at it and go, wow, John McCain did that? That's
right.
Terrible. I had no idea.
Gratuitous.
Yes. And that's it. Yeah.
It sounds like a meme gone bad. I think maybe because meme making is a relatively new art form.
Yes.
You get a lot of people trying it out and trying to do something.
Yeah.
Like you said, we want people to get active. and involved. And then when they do, and some people aren't the greatest meme makers, and they put out something like that, they think
Of course.
they're doing good, but in reality, it's not helping a lot.
Absolutely. And I want to be clear. There is nothing, if you took every bad thing that every single member of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire ever did, not just on their Twitter, but in life, and you took it all and combined it, it would not even begin to compare in comparison to the kinds of things John McCain did. So I want to be clear. I'm not condemning them and saying, oh, you're just as bad as John McCain or anything like that. It's not even comparable. Here was an opportunity to make a controversial point that would piss a lot of people off, but it would also leverage their anger to expose that message to a bunch of people who would go, wait, whoa, John McCain killed millions of people? He supported families being drone bombed? I didn't know that. Right. So that's the narrative. But yeah, you're right. We're all, this is the very early years of the meme wars, and we're still learning what to do here.
I'm thinking what this suggests to me is that we need like expert meme makers to start teaching people. Like we need a class or a
Meming
course
101,
on
yes,
meme
yes.
making. Yeah.
Everyone's
Yes.
looking for that.
Yes.
But I kind of played footsie a little bit about it with if you got bitten by the bug, but just future with the party. Have you ruled out 2024 or
I have not ruled out 2024. It is a decision I will be making later this year. My focus right now is on You Are the Power. And ultimately, the short answer to whether or not I run in 24. Well, first of all, I'm not running for VP again. I will say that. That I know. I was honored to do it. It was a great experience. But I will for the rest of my life be asked about various things that Joe Jorgensen said even after the campaign. And no matter how many times I explain to people, I'm not Joe Jorgensen. My name is Spike Cohen. I'm a completely separate human being. And there are many things that Joe and I don't agree on. The fact that I was her running mate will make that connection continue to exist. So I definitely wouldn't want to do that again. If I decide to run in 24 for president or for anything else, ultimately the short answer to whether or not I do that, or I guess the short way of determining whether or not I will do that will come down to where can I best help the liberty movement for 2024. And that remains to be seen. I don't have a good solid answer for that yet. So I will say I'm not going to be ambiguous about it. Once I know, I'm going to be very clear about it. I'm not going to as you put it, play footsie with it or beat around the bush with it. Once I'm very clear that I don't know right now, and that when I do know, everyone else will know pretty soon after.
Great. William, any final questions?
Yeah, I just would like to bring up the fact that Ayn Rand, one of the reasons why Ayn Rand was against the Libertarian Party was because she felt that they subordinated reason to whims. Those were her words.
Okay.
So you can't talk
I
about
was
a whole
thinking,
coalition and generalize that way.
Yeah, well, I would like to encourage you to maybe check out her ethics. And she wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, and because she really tied her ethics to her politics through the principle of individual rights, and that's a vast topic to talk about, and we won't get into it here, but maybe you can just broadly answer the question of like, is there an ethical base to the Libertarian Party, and how has it changed over time, or what are your ethics, and how do you come up with your politics?
Well, I would say the closest thing to an ethical base that I would say the Libertarian Party has would be the non-aggression principle and the ideas that come from that. I can tell you my ethical base as it relates to my politics is that inherently we own, for lack of a better word, own ourselves or have autonomy over ourselves. And if we have autonomy over ourselves, then that means that we don't just own our lives, but we own our bodies, we own our thoughts, we own our actions. And when I say that, that also means the responsibility for those things, not just the ability to do them, but the responsibility and the consequences that come from our use of those things, which inherently means that we own our labor, which means that we own the product of our labor, which is broadly defined our property. So coming from that concept of self-ownership or individual autonomy comes the idea of property rights and broadly speaking of our rights and our autonomy. And then I would say ethically from that comes the idea of non-aggression. I only owe you what you owe me, which is to not aggress upon each other's lives, bodies, labor, property, or rights. And that is a useful ethical construct for us to live in a way that allows us to compete for scarce resources and cooperate on the accumulation and utilization of scarce resources in as ethical and as conducive a way for us all to thrive. That's the way that I see it I guess from an ethical standpoint, and that kind of all fits pretty cleanly within the concept of the NAP, the non-aggression principle.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, just going back to the first thing we talked about how sometimes surviving a health scare can really reinvigorate. Maybe we just need to be combing the recovery rooms for passionate new recruits.
Go to your local burn ward and see who's ready to take up the mantle for the liberty. Listen, crazier things have been tried, man. You might have something there.
Spike, I want to thank you so much for joining us and just the work you're doing and just trying to move the ball in the right direction for liberty. Thank you. And we're glad you're out there, and we look forward to hearing about your endeavors. And, if you declare, we may invite you back, even if you don't.
Well, I appreciate that, guys. Thank you for having me on. And folks, if you want to continue to follow and see what I'm doing, you can find me on pretty much every social media platform, Spike Cohen. I'm on all those. And my website, what's that?
Yeah, what's your website?
Yeah, my website is spikecohen.com. And the website for You Are the Power is youarethepower.net. If you would like to be a part of the fastest growing movement for human liberty that is fighting to help people and use it to grow the liberty movement and set us all free, then I would love to have you be a part of it. Our website is youarethepower.net.
Great.
Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Great. Well, I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. This is the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we will see you next time.